Howdy readers, I'm Jason. This is Chapter and Verse, and this is my very first Friday Reads video. Okay, so now I know that Friday Reads is kind of an institution here on BookTube. It's a regular thing, right? I mean, it's part of the routine, it's part of the habit. And I get the impression as well that it's something that a lot of people who are involved with BookTube take a kind of reassurance from or comfort in. But for whatever reason, I have never done a Friday Reads video. And I think it's because I'm such a slow reader. And so when I would see Friday Reads videos, and I don't tend to watch them either, but when I would see one in the past or see a couple of successive weeks of them from a particular booktuber, I would always feel a little bit disheartened about the idea of myself doing one, because they're always reading something new each weekend, and that's not the case with me, being a slow reader. But then, I want to say it was at the end of last year, and it might have been a conversation that I was having on Voxer with my friend, the late Leonard Murray, who was a longtime commenter on my channel and other channels as well. And he and I had become really quite good friends. And I want to say it was in a conversation with him that I realized how I could do Friday Reads videos in a way that made sense for me. And so even though I'm often reading the same book for 2 weekends in a row or three weekends in a row, it occurred to me that a Friday Reads video each of those weekends might be a useful way for me to kind of track how I'm feeling about the book as I'm going through it, because we don't ever feel the same about a book when we reach its end as we did at its beginning, or a third of the way through it, half the way through it, etc., etc. Our ideas and our feelings and our impressions change as we move through the text. And so I thought, well, that would be a nice way to kind of keep track of that. To begin, we will start with the book that I plan to finish this weekend. At long last, The Mirror and the Light. The release of this is what prompted Cromwellathon this year. It was also my March of the Mammoths choice, but then the pandemic happened, and it completely derailed my powers of concentration. And I didn't really read much of anything for about a month there, from like late March through late April, really. And I just watched a lot of films. I watched a lot of television. I also found myself incredibly depressed some days, where I would literally just sit on the couch and stare out the window for 7 hours, 8 hours, without realizing that much time had passed, which is kind of scary and kind of alarming. But fortunately, I haven't had a day like that in some time. And then after finishing the Ted Bell thriller, Hawke, and then a decent but mediocre novel called The Lifeboat, I decided to pick The Mirror and the Light back up. And at that point, I was exactly halfway done with the book, and I'm now almost finished. I've got about 140 pages left in this. So the plan is to finish it this weekend. The question is, how am I feeling about the third and final Cromwell novel from Hilary Mantel? So here's the thing. It's a tremendous book. It really is. I don't think anything could have disappointed me, really. But it's not as good, it's not as strong as the first two books. Now, I fully acknowledge that could have something to do with the fact that I put it down for so long, and found myself kind of, I didn't lose track of the story or anything like that, but I lost my momentum. So that might have something to do with it. And I also concede that it might be stronger on a second read. Wolf Hall, I've read 3 times now. It gets better each time I read it. Bring Up the Bodies. When I first read Bring Up the Bodies, I had initially given it 4 stars. And then when I reread it this year for Cromwellathon, I gave it 5 stars. I upped my rating because the book impressed me a lot more on reread. So that might happen down the road with this. And for a while there, after I picked it back up again, I wasn't sure precisely what it was I was having trouble with. And then I figured it out about a week ago. And so basically, in a nutshell, the small problem that I'm having with The Mirror and the Light is kind of twofold. One, it does feel baggy in places to me, and maybe with a book this long, that's going to be inevitable. But it does feel a little bit bloated at times. I mean, there was one page in the novel that was just fucking about plums. It was a whole page about plums. Now, don't get me wrong, Hilary Mantel is a good enough writer that she can write about plums for a page, and much of that was beautiful. But it also really felt unnecessary. That page felt like, Hilary Mantel had done all of this research and found out all of these different, fascinating things about plums, and she didn't want to be bothered to cut any of it away. And so I really feel like the novel at times suffers from an unwillingness in her to edit herself, because I suspect at this point in her writing career, and with this series in particular, her editors are not going to step on her toes. I say editors plural, but by which I mean her editor and her other readers, her first readers. I suspect that they are going to look at any kind of advice or any kind of suggestions that they might give as kind of crossing the line somehow. And so given the likelihood of that, I suspect that Hilary Mantel really needed to engage or activate her inner editor a bit more with this book, and I'm not sure that she did. Also, there are moments in the novel where we'll be in a scene and she'll have a paragraph about what's going on in the scene, and then there'll be the very next paragraph, not separated by a white space or anything like that. And I'm having difficulty figuring out like what exactly it has to do with what directly preceded it. And then there'll be another paragraph directly after that second paragraph with no white space or anything, breaking the chunks of text apart, signifying a kind of a leap from one scene to the next or from one idea to the next. And that third paragraph will have, it seems to me, nothing to do with what preceded it. And I'm not sure what's going on there, because I think that on some level she's done that in all of the Cromwell novels, but in the first two books it seems to me that it's easier to tell when she's making some kind of thematic connection between these what seem to be at first disparate paragraphs. But I thought I would just read you a kind of half a page to demonstrate what I'm talking about here. Latin or French, Majesty, it is indifferent. Duke Wilhelm will make the contents known to her. Yes, Henry says, but I don't know what to put. The usual compliments, I suppose. After all, he cheers up. She is not a lady who is used to love letters. It is a great thing, I find, to know she has never looked at a man before. Like Jane. Jane had no fancy towards anyone, until she knew of my honorable regard. Even then she was not easy to persuade, was she? Such immaculate ladies are not found these days, but it appears you have discovered one other. By the 20th of October, the ambassadors of Cleves are back in Dusseldorf. The Emperor grants a safe conduct for Anna to pass through his territories. Much as he mislikes the alliance, he will not harass a lady on her matrimonial journey. His aunt, his regent in the Low Countries, insists the Princess of Cleves should be shown every courtesy and even provided with an escort. Thurston says to him, "You know that cat that you fetched from Esher in your pocket in the Cardinal's time? Master Gregory took against him and called him Marlinspike. Well, I think I saw him on the wall the other day, with a piece of a rabbit under his paw. But I said to myself, can any cat live that long?" So, the first paragraph, Henry trying to figure out what to write to Anne of Cleves. Then the second paragraph, right, something to do with Anna's passage, right, the plan for her transportation from Germany to England. So those have something to do with each other. The connection wasn't as strong as it could have and should have been, in my opinion. But then right after that, again, separated by no white space at all, right there on the bottom of the page, we have Cromwell's cook talking to him about their old cat. And I don't have a clue how these things relate to each other at all. And that's happening more often in this book than I would like. And again, that might be something that's cleared up a bit for me on reread at some point, 3, 4, 5 years from now. But it's a little bit annoying. It's slightly annoying, I'll say. However, there is still so much in the book that is absolutely magnificent. And one of the things that's really brilliant about particularly the second half of this novel is how we're seeing the relationship, the trust, the camaraderie between Thomas Cromwell and Henry VIII. It's slowly kind of fraying, it's slowly eroding, and the ways in which, the very subtle ways in which Hilary Mantel is demonstrating or suggesting that, I think are just absolutely brilliant. One of those spots comes here on page 634. Around Candlemas, coming into the king, he finds him sitting at twilight over his books. Henry raises his head and looks at him with a faint puzzlement, as if he has never seen him before. Then the king seems to shake himself and says, "You look cold, Thomas. Come to the fire. I was thinking that sometimes we should pray together. How do you pray, my lord? Do you begin with your Pater Noster, or do you repeat a psalm, or do you say words of your own devising?" He, and this is Cromwell, thinking now, preparing to speak, he looks closely at the king and sees the question is not a trap. He says, "I praise God as a master of our ship. No tempest will sink us." So the fact that now, at this point in their relationship, not long before Cromwell is to be arrested and executed under Henry's orders, right? Henry doesn't know that he's going to do this yet. Cromwell doesn't know this is going to happen yet. But the fact that Cromwell is considering something that Henry has just said to him to try to ascertain whether or not Henry is trying to entrap him is really, really telling. Because for the first two novels, particularly the second half of the first book and the first half of the second book, they are so much on the same page, so much on the same wavelength, that I think this would be unheard of for Thomas Cromwell to wonder this, to check what he's going to say before he says it, as a way of preserving his own welfare. I think that at some point in the other two books, they reach a stage in their relationship where Cromwell can say pretty much anything to Henry. In fact, I think Henry wants Cromwell to be able to say anything to him. He is his most trusted advisor, and that is unraveling on some level here. I think Henry is becoming more and more suspicious. I think he's becoming more and more cagey, and I think Cromwell is becoming a little bit more clumsy in reading situations and than he's been in the past. He's always been a genius at that, reading the room, right, arranging his face. But I really feel like Cromwell is becoming not careless so much, but I think maybe the court is becoming complicated in such a way that Cromwell is losing track of allegiances, and he's losing track of what he is supposed to be doing and the timelines on which these things are expected of him, right? This whole thing about Reginald Pole and the fact that Cromwell has yet to capture him, he has yet to kill him, is really pissing Henry off. And I think Cromwell is maybe unaware of the extent to which it's pissing Henry off. And in the past, Cromwell would know. He would be able to intuit. And his gift at that is dulling a little bit at this point in the book. And it creates tension, it creates suspense, which is pretty marvelous. The other thing I wanted to mention that I'm really loving as well, and this is something that she has done throughout the books, Hilary Mantel is absolutely brilliant at telling us just volumes about a character with one sentence. And so Anne of Cleves, right, has been brought to England to marry Henry, and this is the first time that Cromwell sees her up close. It is now that he sees her close for the first time. He has braced himself, his face fitted with a carefully neutral expression, but there is nothing to offend. Quite the opposite. He feels he knows her. It is true, her complexion is dull, but it is, as Gregory says, she is a pleasant-looking woman who might be married to one of your friends, the city wife of a city merchant. You can imagine her rocking a cradle with one foot while talking about the price of pork. And I just feel like, so apart from that little mention of her complexion, there's nothing in that paragraph really about her physical attributes, right? The color of her hair necessarily, the shape of her face, the color of her eyes, anything like that. Instead, the way in which Hilary Mantel, in the mind of Cromwell here, observes Anne of Cleves is, I just think it's kind of breathtaking. And again, we're not necessarily told how she looks, but we're told more how she seems, how she appears, what she puts a person in mind of, how, to what extent she puts a person at ease. And I think that is really beautiful, in part because that speaks so much more about who a person really is than the color of their hair or the color of their eyes. And that Hilary Mantel can see that, understand that, and articulate that is kind of wondrous. And then just a few pages later, like 8 pages later, when Anne appears, she wears a gown strewn with flowers like the king. Hers are not silver, but pearl. Her blonde hair is loose, falling to her waist, and entwined around her coronet a garland of rosemary. She no longer looks like a grocer's wife, but like what she is, a princess whose childhood was spent in a high castle on a crag from where you can see for miles. And again, right? So not just as a princess, but a princess who was raised in a high castle on a crag. There's something so stark and barren about that, and it communicates a kind of steeliness or a kind of flintiness in her, a kind of an air of self-protection, which I think is just absolutely brilliant. And the book is full of moments like that. So yes, it's slightly disappointing, but there's no way, right, unless the novel in the last 130 pages comes to feel like a retelling of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure or something like this. There's no way this book is going to get anything less than 4 stars. And if she really sticks the landing, it could be a 5-star book despite the problems that I'm having with it. So I plan to finish that this weekend. And then the other book I plan to do some reading in this weekend is the book that we are reading for my book club. And it is called Tyll by Daniel Kehlmann. I think this is a German novel translated into English. I think it's German. I'm not sure. Is he German? I have no idea if he's German or not. But I think he is. Let me just read the dust jacket flap to you. Daniel Kehlmann masterfully weaves the fates of many historical figures into this enchanting work of magical realism and adventure. This account of the 17th century, there we are, vagabond, performer, and trickster Tyll Eulenspiegel, that sounds German, begins when he's a scrawny boy growing up in a quiet village. When his father, a miller with a secret interest in alchemy and magic, is found out by the church, Tyll is forced to flee with the baker's daughter, Nell. They find safety and companionship with a traveling performer who teaches Tyll his trade, and so begins a journey of discovery and performance for Tyll as he travels through a continent devastated by the 30 Years' War and encounters along the way a hangman, a fraudulent Jesuit scholar, and the exiled King Frederick and Queen Elizabeth of Bohemia. So, yeah, it sounds very much like a book up my alley, in my wheelhouse. This was chosen by my friend Laura's husband, Alex, in our book club. And I suppose Alex is a friend too, although I don't know him nearly as well as I know Laura. But yeah, looking forward to that. So I'll be starting this as soon as I finish The Mirror and the Light, and maybe even before I finish The Mirror and the Light. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is the movie that I'll be watching for sure this weekend. I'll probably watch 2 or 3 movies this weekend, but this is the one I know I'll be watching for certain, and that is Synecdoche, New York, directed by Charlie Kaufman, written and directed by Charlie Kaufman. I am trying to kind of put together a list right now of the best films that I've seen of the 21st century. So I'm trying to fill in gaps in my movie watching, essentially, of the 21st century. And by gaps, I mean films that have been really critically lauded or are favorites of friends of mine whose taste in movies I trust, and that I haven't seen yet. And this is in the first category, right? This is a movie that a lot of critics really felt like was one of the best films of its decade. My friend Ben, who I'm going to be watching this with, saw the premiere of it, the UK premiere of it in London, and hated it, but has been haunted by it since seeing it, and feels like he should give it another shot too. So it'll be a first viewing for me, and I can't wait to watch it. It looks kind of wild. The trailer for it has always made Kelly and I both think of Martin Dressler by Stephen Milhauser, the novel Martin Dressler, which won the Pulitzer Prize. Yeah, it seems kind of dreamlike. It seems maybe slightly magical realist, and it seems very much a movie about America in a very complicated, whimsical, maybe disturbing way. So, anyhow, Synecdoche, New York, by Charlie Kaufman. So that's it. My first Friday reads. It was longer than I was planning, so I'm sorry about that. If you made it to the end, thank you. I really appreciate all of you who find something of value, I suppose, in what I have to say and what I talk about, and in the conversations that we have in the comments field and on Box or so. Anyway, I will leave it there. Have a wonderful weekend, all of you, and I will see you again very soon. Adios.